Thanks so much for sticking around. We're finishing strong. As you guys know, we've also got Deepak Chopra coming. We've got a great kind of finish to the day today. So we're really excited. I can't thank everybody enough for coming out. So I wanted to introduce Fabien and Claire. In addition to being on our panel and being impressive on the brand and the brand marketing side with their respective businesses, they are also friends of mine and of Andrew's through the sports space. So I'm going to ask each of them to kind of give a 2-minute rundown of their background, so you guys can have a little bit of an idea who's up here with me. So Claire, why don't you start us off?
I'll start. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Hi everybody, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. Little introduction myself. I'm French, if you haven't already noticed in the first 5 seconds of me chatting. Living in New York now for 2 years. I grew up in France, and then I actually moved to China, spent 8 years of my life in China, studying and then just working in tennis. That's where I started my career, and that's where I still working today. So spent overall 8 years there working with the WTA for 6 years, very involved with the WTA finals, which is the last tournament of the year on the women's tour, and really what we call the crown jewel in women's tennis. So was very involved with that and business development really in China and in the Far East. And now actually since January working with Octagon, so moved on from the rights holder side to the agency side, and also working with tournaments and players. So same industry, different look, which is interesting. And that's, short intro on myself. Very bad tennis player, I have to say that, because a lot of people have expectations that when you work in sport or in a specific sport, you are very good. And I know you are very good, so I'm not, but have always been a big fan and, played growing up and continue to play, but would not be a hitting partner to any of the players on tour, that's for sure.
Great. Fabien?
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm French as well. I've been in the sports industry for the past 20 years. Started my career at Nike in sports marketing. Then I was a commercial and marketing director for the Mouratoglou Tennis Academy. If you're familiar with the tennis world, it's a famous tennis academy created by Patrick Mouratoglou. In 2012, after that, I decided to start my own boutique talent management company, focusing on representing athletes, but not only superstars and athletes that also were doing some good on the side. Champion on the court and off the court. I've managed a couple of athletes in many disciplines, not only in tennis. And I've always believed that sport is a massive platform to solve some of the biggest problems we face in the world. And sport is not just about business, it's also about having a positive impact. And I co-founded 17 Sport a couple of years ago, which is a purpose sports marketing company. And we are based in Paris and in the US as well. And we are about 30 people today.
Great, thanks guys. Fabien, let's start with you since you kind of brought it up. We're talking about how can brands use sports as a platform for loyalty. And in today's age of social and charity, how do they use sports for that? And how are you seeing that coming from your business, which is working with athletes who are giving back and are charitable?
I think today there is kind of a new generation of consumers expecting corporates and brands to really stand for something more than just making profits. You want to work or you want to buy products or services from companies that are really making a difference in the world. So I think today brands have really a responsibility to show that they are on a mission to really solve a problem, not just making money as well. So it's not just about philanthropy. I think doing good for many years has been through the lens of philanthropy or charity. But today it has to be at the heart of who you exist and why you exist. And I think people more and more are buying the why and not just what you're selling, what's the product, but more what you stand for. And it has to be authentic. It can't be just a campaign. And at 17 Sports, we focus a lot partnering with brands that are really on a mission, but it's trying to make a commitment and not doing a campaign. it's easy to do a 3-month campaign, but I mean, making a 5-year commitment to provide access to sports for young girls and measuring the impact you're making, the difference you're making, as much as measuring also the return on investment and the money you're making. So I think it's both.
Great. And you were working with Serena Williams,
Yeah.
kind of helped her really get started on that. Can you give us kind of like a little brief?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to work for 5 years with Serena and her management team, helping her to really structure her commitment to women empowerment as really her purpose, I mean, into her brand. What does it mean and how she can really articulate her purpose and her commitment to empower women, how she can bring that to life. So of course, it really opened her a new range of potential partners, because you can't really make a difference by yourself, right? As an athlete, you need to partner with organization. And by organization, I mean non-profits, I mean corporate organization. But I think the age of traditional sponsorship is over, where you're selling just visibility, hospitality. I think brands are still looking for this, but I think today, as an athlete, you need to have a purpose. You have a brand, so you need to have a brand purpose, and you need to partner with, I mean, mission-aligned organization, sponsors that really join forces with you to really make the difference.
Yeah, that's great. Turning to you, Claire, you're at Octagon now, one of the biggest sports and entertainment agencies in the world, arguably. Great brands. You work with Stella Artois, who's a big sports sponsorship. You own tennis tournaments. You own athletic events. But you're also on the player side and on the talent side. So we just had Evan up from New Balance, who was talking about how he includes on his athlete contracts with New Balance that they get an allocation of product that the talent can use for charity give back. How much are you seeing from the athlete side, but also on the client side, charitable entities being a part of contracts and a part of partnerships?
Great question, by the way. And I think I saw this morning that there was a new launch of a new shoe with Coco Gauff, and it's really amazing to see what is being done in the space. I think that the most, if there's really one word to talk about is authenticity. I mean, more and more, I mean, we see how, the players, I would say an athlete nowadays is not just anymore an athlete, it's a person, and you want to see the multiple facets of their life and who they are, not just when they're playing tennis, but also outside the tennis court. So for me, these kind of initiatives are fantastic when the player has a personal, interest and a personal, touch for that. And there are some players who are, from their family stories, their background or something like that, they're deeply touched and, they grew up like this or they come from an underserved community. So for them, it touched them very personally. And in this case, I think it's fantastic. And the fact that if you gave that example of New Balance, who now has a, number of, product, let's say, allocated for charities. I think it's really, really great. But even, taking a step back, I think that all of this has to come from the player themselves, feeling like this is part of, the role that they want to have in this world and the impact that they want to give more than, the brand pushing for them to do that. Because at the end of the day, I feel like the consumers will feel the difference, the fan will feel the difference, because the authenticity is key. So, yeah.
Consumers are reading through the BS, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
More and more.
Right.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say.
that's great. And Fabien, on your side, are you having a lot of brands coming to you asking about, hey, how do we consult with us on how to work? Who's a good athlete to work with? Who's another? What's a good way to collab on a level of good, right? And on giving back and on charity.
It's a good question. I think you have two types of brands. You have brands that have been historically in sponsorship in sports for years and years, so they have the culture of sponsorship, but they now question how their assets, how their partnership are really serving their brand purpose. And sometimes the truth is that it doesn't. I mean, sometimes they've been in supporting an athlete, or they've been in sport just because the CEO loves that sport and that's it. But I think, so they start to question, well, rather, I mean, those investment in sports needs to be additive to everything you're doing at the organizational level and not dilutive. On the other side, you have some brands that haven't been in sports it's new to them, and they approach sport not through the lens of sponsorship, but more through the lens of, okay, how sports can become a platform to bring and to activate our brand purpose as an organization. And it's totally new for them. So they don't think through the lens of visibility or hospitality. They think, well, if we partner with that property or with these athletes, what is the difference we're going to make together in the world? And that really, I think, becomes the essence of why your partnership should exist. So yeah, that's how I think.
All right, and then let's turn the conversation a little bit to athletes versus properties. I think one thing we haven't really talked a lot about today was we're, on the eve of the last Grand Slam of the year, one of the biggest sports properties in New York. They say that, the US Open over those 2 weeks brings in over $1 billion of, value to the city and the surrounding area, restaurants, hotels, and all that. I wanted to talk about, what are the pros and cons of partnering with athletes versus partnering with properties? And kind of which is better, I guess, depending on, what the objectives are for each.
We're just talking about that, right? Just before getting on stage. First of all, I think they're complementary. I think that when a brand is looking into all the opportunities in sports, and there are many sports and so many athletes, and each have a voice. And now, in the age of social media, there's such a more direct connection as well, right? It's not just the press conference and, once a week or whatsoever, there's a touch point, but every day there's a constant communication. Things have shifted a lot. And I think that for brands, it's not necessarily easy today to be, well, where should I go? How should I start? Is it, a property? Is it a player or all of that? Also depending on the, is it a global brand? Or there's a lot of questions, but I think that when you work with an athlete, you really touch, and and then you have the athletes really embodying a brand. You're really gonna go and touch to the emotional side, right? You're gonna speak to. It's about the fandom, and it's a really personal, deep emotional connection with the fans. Which is the essence of sport, honestly, right? That's what we're all here for, and it's really at the foundation and centric to everything. And then I would say a tournament, in my opinion, in my experience as well, provides more flexibility. So the players are still central, right? But it's not just the one player. It's a field of players. But it's also the flexibility to have a more maybe corporate approach if you want to host some clients of yours, have the whole, hospitality. Sometimes it's a bit more tangible as well, right? If you sell, products, you can put them in the hands of the fans. So for me, it's really a complementary approach. The other thing that I would say, and it's also important sometimes when you're a brand and, you actually need to deliver, is that when you partner with a tournament, you're not dependent on, is a player playing, or is he maybe injured, or is there bad press? All these things we've seen so many stories of those where then, you're with this partnership with this person and then something happens and there's bad press, and then how do you manage that? And then it's a whole crisis management, all these things. So a tournament offers that flexibility. So all of that to say, I think they're both great and complementary, but it depends on the angle that one looks at. I don't know, Fabien, what are your thoughts?
I think you said everything. No, I fully agree. I think it's also the way you activate them. How you activate through an athlete, how you activate through a property. Yeah, through an athlete, you always have the reputation risk, of course. You never know what can happen. But in the end, of course, you have lots of pros in a way that you're looking to build a very organic, authentic connection with your fans. And especially if you want to drive and help your fans to become not just passive ambassadors or passive fans, you want them to become more active. You want them to take action. I think the athletes have a power here. You identify to themselves. So I think it helps to have really athletes as ambassadors, but it has to be organic. It has to be activated in a certain way that it feels truth, and it's not just, again, a campaign.
And if I can add one thing on that, I think that also the athlete angle is so interesting because you get to lean on the personality of that athlete. So if you look at tennis, I think traditionally it was more, high-end brands like a Rolex, who's been in the sport forever, these kind of brands. And then in recent years, you have beats coming in the sport. we wouldn't have seen that maybe 5 years ago, but, you have athletes with strong personalities, different personalities, like a Naomi Osaka, and, like so many now. And it has really also allowed for a new wave of brands, more lifestyle, more, but not so traditional, I would say. And so it's really cool because you see that there's just, so many brands now that get involved.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure everybody tuned in some capacity, shape, or form into the Olympics. Well, it would be unfair to not bring up the French Olympics with two of my French friends here. Let's talk a little bit about the international sport, not just of the Olympics, but of tennis, right? Here we are. There's not that many sports that really reach a true international audience, right? And I think we saw a lot of that at the opening ceremonies in France, right? A lot of that opening ceremony was focused on Rafael Nadal, Serena Williams, for example, two of the big tennis stars in the world. What do you think the pros and cons are of, basically an international, partnering with a true international property like the Olympics, or versus partnering with like a true international athlete like a Serena or a Rafa or Novak? What do you guys think? Pros and cons of based on kind of what we saw at the Olympics. The press we got in America was obviously probably a little bit different than what you guys had in France. But what are your
yours?
Because
ours was incredible. Yeah.
Ours was pretty cool. I would say, but and we were doing a lot of cool stuff. We were, NBC brought in Snoop Dogg, and we were trying to obviously reach a different audience through that. But I'd love to hear you guys pros and cons on, kind of international properties, pros and cons versus the athletes.
I can start. I will say that first of all, it's not just about sport for performance. It's really sport for entertainment, and that's why you have Snoop Dogg and different personalities that are coming up. And sometimes you don't feel the connection, but the numbers are here, and I think it creates. Even if you don't follow sport, even if you're not a sports fan, I think you like it and you enjoy because it's cool. And I think that was very smart from the French Olympic COJO to do that and to have some international stars to really broaden the audience and to show that it's not just about France and it's really global. Coming to the Olympics, I think many brands partner with the IOC because of the values they represent, respect. Yeah, exactly, and it's not just about getting your logo next to the rings, and so I think more and more brands see how they can leverage the Olympics and the Paralympics to tell the story and to show their commitment as well to make the world a better place.
Yeah, Personally, I love to always take a global approach to this project, and in my years with the WTA, that's what I found really fascinating, is to see how can you have an impact at a global level, and how do you manage that, right? Because each culture is different, and there's so many specificities. You cannot necessarily do the same thing in US than in China. That's an obvious. You certainly cannot. But I've personally always loved to work in this sort of like very global environment and have the local challenges. I find that very interesting. There's so many stories around the Olympics, and the partners, obviously there is this big focus on the storytelling and the association with the athletes and all of those things. But going one step beyond, it's also how you can grow your business with this, right? Because at the end of the day, it's so much money spent. This needs to be worth it in some way or another, and different brands will have different ways to measure this. But an example, I read about Airbnb and how they activated and what they were able to do for their own regulations in France. It was incredible. And so actually the money that they spent on the sponsorship fee, let's say, they earned, I don't even know what were the numbers, but they made back, at least twice, just because they were able to delay some regulations with the French government because of the impact actually that the Olympics has in France. And so they worked together and they had to make it work for their partners. So I find this fascinating, and there's so many ways. Like, you think sports sometimes is just a logo, sometimes this, sometimes that, but you can be so creative and have such a deep impact in different aspects. But yeah, it's it's not, just one size fits all, but that was a really cool example that I saw specific to the Olympics.
That's great. Continuing, getting kind of off the properties and more talking about the individuals. Both of you guys represent athletes, and here you are on the eve of the last Grand Slam. One thing about the U.S. Open and the Grand Slams is that it really brings together everybody from the industry. So you've got not only the other tournaments here, you've got agents, you've got the manufacturers, you've got not only the fans but also the hospitality components. What are you guys doing to sell? I mean, you're obviously always selling your clients, right? And you're trying to get partnerships with brands and a variety of other kind of markets out there. What are your strategies heading into the Open? Now you guys are here. You're here early. We're about a week early from the start. What are your guys' strategy heading in, and how do you use tennis as different from the other athletes you might have in other sports?
I'm happy to start. Again, I think I want to go back to the word authenticity. I think that a partnership is only valuable if you're building something long-term and if there's a true alignment between the player, the athletes, and the mission of the company and really the messaging. So, you can always sell something to someone like this and it's going to work for a year or whatever is the duration of the contract. Sometimes better, sometimes, worse, but it's going to happen. But I feel like what is really interesting nowadays is to build these real long-term strategies where a brand, really comes in and has a shared mission with the player and they have common values and you're gonna build something together which is beyond the patch on a kit or something like that. So at least the way I do it, and you can tell me your sales strategies after or now, which would be great, but it's more to very simply tell the stories of those players, and who are they? What do they care about? What have they lived through? What do they want to do on the court, but also outside the court? What's their, their grit and their passion? So for me, this is where it all belongs. It's who are the players? What do they care about? Yeah,
and I was going to say, we were talking about earlier about one of your clients is Donna Vecic, who was a silver gold medalist in the tennis this past summer. And, it doesn't hurt that they're winning, right?
No,
I mean, that's the ultimate, right?
I would say it's probably, it's it's number one, and marketability, many ways, and sometimes it's not really fair as well because depending on where they come from, the markets, there can be more appeal. I mean, we've seen that with Emma Raducanu. It was absolutely incredible. She won here, and then the fact that she has a Chinese, Romanian, British heritage, all the brands, LVMH was, there the day after. So obviously that's a big part as well.
Well, I mean, to add on what Claire has been saying, I believe if you really build a long-term successful partnership, you need to go beyond performance. You need to really, build a program with the athletes. And more brands behind the sponsorship are trying to build a program where they are trying to show to the different audiences how they are making a difference and how it's driving the brand and how they're building brand relevance through that. But it has to be long-term, it has to be authentic. And I think the first piece is before selling an athlete to a brand is really defining what the athlete stands for. And sometimes when you ask an athlete, what do you stand for? He's going to say, well, I stand for winning US Open. I don't think so. I think you stand for something much bigger. I think you stand for something that goes beyond tennis. What is it? And sometimes they don't know. So I think we also have a role as an agent to educate our athletes in defining what they stand for, who they are, and what's their purpose in life. Because before being athletes, they're all men and women.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys sharing your perspectives and everything. Does anybody have any, as we kind of wrap up and keep things rolling, does anybody have any questions? Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And
Thank
how
you
about
so much.
a hand for Fabien and Claire? Thanks so much for being here.